Hello everyone, welcome to Cloud War. My name is Santiago. So on today's video, we will be building the first application that will be deployed to the Azure Container App. So in order to achieve that, we are going to be taking a couple of steps. The first one, we will be creating the Azure Container App environment. Then we are going to be creating a managed identity, which is going to be given the permissions to pull from the ACR. But in the middle of those two, we are going to be deploying a new ACR to the Azure portal in order to deploy our images. So the managed identity is going to be used to give permissions to the ACR to be able to pull images later. So then we are going to take a look into a quick solution, a web application that we have built today, and we are going to be building that image and pushing it to the ACR. Then we will be creating the Azure Container App. We will be deploying the new application using the image that we created on the step above, and take a look into the application. As always, we will be using the Azure CLI in order to create all the resources that are required to complete this lab. So follow me on each one of the step by step to complete that. So with that in hand, let's get started. Okay, so as always, we will be using the Azure CLI in order to create our resources locally. So if you don't have installed, remember to install the Azure tool in your local environment to be able to interact with these commands. Okay, so for the first step, we will be creating the Container App environment. So for this one, we are going to be leveraging the Container App object and the sub-object environment, which is the emp in this case, and we are going to be using the create operation. In a very basic configuration, all you need to provide is just the name of the Container App, give the resource group where you would like to store this resource, give the location where you want to store this environment, and as our output we are going to be querying the name just to get the output and make sure the resource has been created successfully. So let's execute this command and we will be back in a moment once the process has been completed. Okay, so maybe after about 2 minutes the environment has been created. So as you can see in the output, everything is ready to go. If we take a sneak peek into the Azure portal, we can find in here our new container environment that has been created. And if we take a look, we are given a static API, we are given a Dapper version and a Keda version as well. So this is part of the tooling that I mentioned on the previous video. So Dapper, it will allow us to build an event-driven application mostly flawlessly. And Keda is a tooling from the Kubernetes environment that is going to allow the container app to escalate mostly flawlessly. In here we will have a lot of basic configuration that we will explore later, but we have set up for like a DNS, set up a managed identity for the environment itself, set up Azure files to interact with the Azure storage account and mount volumes into the container, certificates, Dapper, and the usual configuration that we have for apps. So now with that in hand, let's go into the next step, where we are going to be creating an Azure managed identity in order to give it the permissions to pull into the ACR. So let's do that pretty simple. So once more, we will be using the AC identity show, providing a name. In this case, this is going to be container app mi, providing the resource name, and we are going to be querying the principal ID. Remember, the principal ID in this case is going to be the GUID that is assigned to your managed identity once has been created. In this case, I'm going to start it in a variable because we will be using it in a moment to access other resources. So it's pretty handy to store these variables into the console to avoid like a typing or having the need to find manually the variables or creating new queries in order to get that information. In case that you already have a managed identity created, you can use the show command as I'm showing in here. Okay, now we have our managed identity created. If you already have one, just remember to use the command show instead of the create one. Since I am creating everything from scratch, I use the created command in this case. Okay, now let's follow up and let's create our ACR. So using a very similar command than the previous one, we are storing the ID of the ACR into this variable. We are going to be querying the ID as the output. Remember, the ID is a complex text that contains information like the subscription ID, the resource group, the ID of the resource group, and the name and the type of resource that you are using. So I'm storing that into this variable. As always, we provide just a name, a SKU. In this case, we are going to be using the standard one, and the resource group as part of the request. So let's create the ACR. Now that the ACR has been created, let's follow up into the next step. So like I mentioned, we created the managed identity with the purpose of giving it permissions to be able to pull from the ACR. This managed identity is going to be very helpful when we create the Azure Container app itself, because we are going to assign this manage identity, which is going to allow the container app to be able to contact the ACR and pull images into it. So once more, we are leveraging the Azure Active Directory and the authentication in order to avoid using credentials and stuff like that. So let's create the role very quickly. So the role assignment has been completed. We can take a sneak peek into the Azure portal, and we can see that our managed identity already have the ACR pull permission against the new ACR that we created. So we will be using that later. So now that we have the ACR created, let's move into the next step, where we are going to be storing the managed identity ID as part of one of the commands that we have in here. So for the identity in this case, I would like to use the show. And in this case, instead of querying the principal ID, we are going to be querying the ID. We are replacing this in here because for the creation of the container app in a moment, we are going to require this. Okay, now let's take a sneak peek into the code, which is actually pretty simple. If we take a look into the UI, we have a very basic web application. This is a Blazor application, and it's just the standard web application template. It is not going to be nothing too overcomplicated. So we have the user Docker image in here, which are very basic steps from the .NET infrastructure. And with that, we are going to be building this image and deploying into the Azure side. So let's go back into the console. Right now, I am sitting into the root directory of the same solution that I just showed you very quickly. So let's use the ACR build command in order to deploy this image. So what we need to execute, it will be again the ACR build command. We need to provide the name of the registry that we would like to target our image with. And we are going to be providing a name in this case. For this one, we are going to be providing the name sample and using the tag B1 just for now, because we are going to be deploying a new versions later to keep it the example. As a file, we are providing, of course, the Docker file as the input for the build and using the existing folder as the main context. So this is why we use the dot at the end. So let's execute the build. Image has been pushed into the ACR. We are ready to go for the next step. But before that, let's take a look into the Azure portal. So in the registry that we created, we already see that we have the sample image. And if we take a sneak peek, we see that we have the V1 created already. So let's go back into the terminal and let's move into the next step. So now we are going to be using once more the container app operation, but in this case, we will be using the create command in order to create it. So let's take a sneak peek. So in order to create an Azure Container App, we need to provide a name, we need to provide the resource group as always, we need to provide the name of the container application that we would like to deploy. We also need to provide the image that we would like to use, and in this case we will be using the Azure Labs, Azure ACR.io, and we are going to be using the image sample. So for that, also we are going to be using the ingress parameter, saying that we are going to be exposing this application externally, and the target that we are going to be opening in the port will be the 8080. So when we expose this application, this is going to be exposed through our DNS. We are going to see when we make a request into the application, and the port 8080 is the one exposed in the Docker file. If we take a sneak peek in here, we see that we expose the port 8080 and 8081. In this case, this will be for HTTP and HTTPS. So now that we have the ports, we also need to provide the registry server we would like to connect with, the amount of replicas that we would like to have, and this is actually pretty important because this way we can say to the application how many containers are going to be available to take a request from our application. So the minimum of replicas it will be 1, and the max of replicas it will be 2. Azure Container Apps will take care of the escalating the application to a maximum of 2 replicas if the amount of requests increase and is required by the application. In this case, we are assigning also the environment, which we created previously. In this case, it's going to be the Container Apps Env. For the registry, like I mentioned before, we will be using for the identity the ID of the managed identity that we created, and after the process has been completed, we are going to be querying the name. So let's execute this command and we will be back once it has been completed. Okay, so now that the application has been deployed and everything is ready to go, we can take a look into the DNS that has been created for us. So for that, we are going to be taking a look into this URL. So as you can see, we already got the answer back. So let's open up this into the browser. So as you can see, we already have our application created and ready to go. Also, if we jump into the Azure portal and we take a look into the container app, we will find a couple of things. Now that the deployment has been completed, the deployment created automatically for us the first revision of our container. So we got a random name in this case due to the basic configuration that we get to the deployment. But as you can see, we have one replica that is currently executing. Also, we can take a sneak peek into the container and we can see the name is sample app. It is using the Azure Container Registry. It is assigning the URL and also using the image that we gave and the image tag v1. We have a very basic configuration in here. And also we are giving the option to scale in case that we would like to. But for today, we are only going to leave the replicas into 1 and for 2. Okay, so that in today's video, we created our first application. So in the next video, we will be moving to more advanced scenarios and we are going to be deploying more complex applications and start connecting those. Thank you for joining me today and see you in the next one.